Hey y'all, Damon here. I thought I'd do something a little different today and answer some questions and talk about my playing with James Brown period. So one of the questions was, what was it like having a guitar tech? We did not have guitar techs. So we would go play these big shows and we would literally, if there was a band before us, we would have to often just have a few pedals and a few cables, right? And just carry those things to the stage ourselves and set them where they'd be. A lot of times he would make us, if the audience was going to see us do this, he would have us take our suit coat off. So we had to be dressed and ready to do the gig. Ironed up the suit and everything, but we would have to take off the suit coat or put another coat on top of it so they couldn't really tell that we were in the band, so that they wouldn't get that, oh, there's a guy in a uniform, he must be in the band, setting up his own pedals. So you would kind of have a different coat on and go set up your pedals. And one of the funniest ones was when we did the United We Stand concert after 9/11 at RFK Stadium. Really to see the difference between bands. We played after Huey Lewis and the News. And of course, he's got a huge pedal rack, the guitar player. And he's got his guys carrying that out and setting everything up. And he's backstage chilling, right? Well, we watch all this going on. We're holding our stuff. Everybody did 3 songs, so we knew in about 15 minutes, 10-15 minutes, we'd have to go do our set. And this is, of course, RFK Stadium, like, I don't know, 50, 60,000, something like that. So I remember me and Keith there, and I'm holding my wah-wah and my tuner and my distortion pedal, and I've got a couple cables kind of wrapped up in it, and we've got the different coat on, and we had to go set everything up. And then it was just like, wow, then go run and take your other coat off and get ready, and 20 seconds later, you're on stage. So we did not have any guitar techs. One time, the first time I tried to play a Fender Strat, I got a brand new Fender Strat. I'd always played Les Pauls up until then. We're playing the House of Blues in LA. And just before the show, I realized I had the back plate on wrong. I had put new strings on, but I had the back plate on the wrong way. I realized at the last second, or I wouldn't have been able to get in there without a screwdriver to change a string. And I broke a string that night in front of Jimmy Page, Joe Perry, and Slash. All Les Paul guys. So my first day on a Strat, break a string in front of all these guys, no guitar tech. Luckily, I had changed that back plate and I was able to have a backup string and get it through there. Of course, I'm not playing for a couple minutes, so James Brown's not digging this, but he sees what happens. And it was very rare that I'd break a string. I would make sure I went up to bigger strings or got new like Graph-Tech saddles to not break strings and stuff. But I thought that was kind of a funny one to watch, like the guys with their guitar techs and the huge pedal boards and everything, and guys there to fix anything if anything went wrong, and we were just really on our own. And my buddy Keith Jenkins, he let me play the wah-wah parts because he didn't want to bother with carrying a wah-wah out on the road because it was hard enough, carrying the stuff that we had to carry, our bags, our guitar, our, whatever other stuff. So for a while I was carrying an extra guitar. I was taking this Les Paul here, this Les Paul Custom, as a second guitar. But then you can only carry one on with you and you got to check one. So taking a guitar like this and putting it in a flight case and making it go through the conveyor belts and everything was kind of dangerous. So I didn't do that too much. We had a guitarist, a bassist named Jimmy Lee Moore. Sometimes he would play this to give us some extra cool stuff on the jazz tunes instead of playing bass, because we would have like another bass player in the band as well. Sometimes there was even 3 bass players in the band on stage at the same time. Moving along, here's another guitar, but since I have them out, this was the one I played for most of the last few years with James Brown. And here's those Graph-Tech saddles I was talking about. Those are very helpful for not breaking strings. So I was able to not have to stay with like 11 gauge strings to not break any. I'd go back to 10s, but these would keep it where they wouldn't break. So very helpful stuff. Let's see, what was the most people you ever played for? Well, before I got in his band, I had played gigs with the Jimmy Van Zant band where we had played upwards of 4,000 or 5,000 people. So I was kind of used to big crowds, and you can't really focus on all those people. You just have to focus on what you're doing at the time. And with James Brown, it was very easy because all we had to do was focus on him all the time. You couldn't get into too many other peripheral things going on. You could look at somebody in the audience and be like, hey, how are you doing? And you look back at him and he's like, I got you. So you got to be watching him all the time. So that made it a little less daunting to play for these huge crowds. Now, the biggest crowd I ever played for was either Woodstock 99. We were the opening band, so people were still filing in, but it was over 100,000 something by then. But then there was a festival in Zurich that I think we were the headlining band, and I think it might have been even like 150,000 or something like that. But they say Woodstock got up to 200,000, but I don't think there was that many there when we played because we were the first band. Okay, so let's see. Was it surreal or was it like finally, right, when you play for the big crowds? Well, I would say it was definitely always surreal, and you would get nervous for these things, but you'd get used to them after you did more and more of them. And it's like when you have this big band that you're playing with, you're just playing a role in that band. You're not like having to carry that whole show like James Brown had to carry the whole show. So, and it was easy for us to just have to focus on him and always be watching him. One of the things that our percussionist, Spike Neely, said one time was, if you ever lose the groove, just watch his right foot. Because, I guess for you guys looking over here, because his right foot is constantly keeping the beat. Like he never stops grooving with the band. So just keep watching him. And if you're with that foot, you know you're good. You know, what was my warm-up routine? Well, I would put on strings. I would maybe get 2 shows out of a pack of strings. So I'd put on the strings before the show, and I would go through that 1, 2, 3, 4 with down up picking on each string, chromatic exercises, take that up the neck a bit. I would do a second one where I kind of skipped strings a bit, always getting your alternate picking going. Then I would go through the pentatonic 5 positions, like for E. Then I would start doing the flat fifths in there and start improvising, bending strings and stuff. Then I would go through the 5 positions of like G major and do those 3s exercises and 4s exercises just to get all that picking and stuff worked all the way up. And I would just do more kind of improv bends to make sure that if I bent strings, they wouldn't go out of tune too bad and stuff. Was the touring schedule tiring? Well, yes, it was definitely a lot. Like sometimes we would have an occasional day off and get to kind of rest up, but a lot of it was, get on a plane. I would get on a plane from Vegas to wherever we were going, and then from there we'd get on buses and planes, and Europe tours would be like a bus to an airport and then maybe another flight to get to the place you're going, and then you either play like that day or you play maybe the next day. So it was a lot of bus travel where we only had like 2 seats for each person. Like there was a lounge in the back, you could go hang out, but there wasn't really room for anybody to sleep anywhere. So we were kind of just hunched over in chairs, like you got your backpack next to you, you're kind of sleeping on it or something. So my buddy Keith Jenkins, he mentioned once before I was even in the band, he was like, yeah, this isn't so much about music as it is about how long can you stay in an uncomfortable position for, and not complain about it, as a joke. So that was kind of the reality of it though. But we had a great time, hanging on the bus and everything, but it would get a bit much. Now I felt worse for the people from Georgia, from Augusta, where James Brown was based out of, because they would have to get on that bus and ride that bus to wherever the gig was. So if it was in LA, I could fly from Vegas to LA and do this gig and fly back. But they had to drive from Augusta to LA and then drive back. So that's a lot of time on a bus. So, of course, the bus was emptier. They'd have more, they could kind of lay across seats and stuff like that, lay in the back and whatever. But still, a lot of driving, a lot of road. So, yes, it was definitely tiring. It was exciting, though, when you get to do these gigs. So it was worth it. I wouldn't really do it again at this stage of my life, like how we were doing it then. I don't think I would really go for that, for the money was involved. But for the time, I was 28 years old, 29 years old when I got in the band. So it was worth it. It was definitely cool. It was a lot of fun. Let's see. Was it boring doing, and did you do the same set list a lot? Well, the thing about it was very spontaneous. So you never knew that the next song that was probably going to come was going to come, because he could change the set at any moment. So like, for instance, we didn't do Cold Sweat a lot, but it could come in at any moment. There was a tune, I Can't Stand It. We didn't always do that, but it could pop in at any moment. He would just have like a 1-word cue for these things, and then bam, you're into it. Like for instance, Soul Power, he would just all of a sudden, he would say, power, and then bam, the next beat was the beginning of that song. So it was very spontaneous, and there was a lot of songs in the show, but it did kind of have the same flow with the same set list, There could be things that would change out in the middle here and there. Sometimes his wife wouldn't have her couple songs. Maybe she wasn't on the road, so there'd be room for a couple different songs to pop in there. Sometimes when he'd play for a certain audience, like maybe an older black crowd, he would bring out some of these hits from way back, like There Was a Time or Say It Loud, I'm Black and I'm Proud, So sometimes he would Papa Don't Take No Mess, stuff like that. That was fairly rare for a normal show, So it'd be fun when he had longer to play, like a 2-hour show or more than 2 hours. He would bring in a lot of great hits, and we would kind of like medley quick versions of them and stuff. So that was always fun to get those rarities in there. Like say something like Paying the Cost to Be the Boss or something like that. These special types of things, Payback, stuff like that. Super Bad was one of my favorites. So that's leading up to my favorite moment in the band. We were in Japan. It was a great tour. It was 2003. We were having the best time. The shows were great. We were done by like 9 o'clock, and they would throw us a party every night where they wouldn't let us pay for anything, and it was just the best time. And so, leading up to the last show, I got in some headspace where I wanted to do like this karate kick at the end of my solo. So I was out there. We were at this Sapporo Park Hotel in Sapporo, Japan. Had a good buzz going. I was out there. I had my electric guitar out there by the lake, and I was like on the dock of this lake, and there's nobody really out there. It was like 10 o'clock at night or something. But there was one guy playing drums across the pond, I remember. And I was like kind of jamming across the pond with this dude with an electric guitar. I don't know how far that sound carried, you know. But I'm out there practicing how I'm going to do this kick and everything. So eventually, some of my friends come around. We walk around the pond. We find that dude. He's out there. And I'm like, hey, man, sound good, you know. He's like, practicing, you know. So great times. But anyway, the show comes the next night. I get my solo. And I have our drummer, Eric Hargrove, kind of time this with me. I'm like, I'm gonna like come up and like try to land this on a certain beat, and I want you to hit a crash right then. So we did it just right, and James Brown's coming up to saying my name, give it up for Damon, for the solo, whatever. And so as he's coming up, I line it up and I throw up this karate kick, right? And Hargrove, bam, hits the cymbal right there, and James Brown was like I wowed him. So he's like starts running around the stage a little bit. He comes back and like high fives me and stuff. That was like my favorite moment of the whole playing with James Brown. It was just, I got to surprise him once, he dug it. So that was one of the cool ones. All right, then what about new arrangements that would come into the show? Like who would make those? Would James Brown make those? Would band members make those? Well, there wasn't a whole lot of those. There was a tune they put together just before I came in, Funk on a Roll. So I believe James Brown came up with a lot of that. A lot of times he would sing you a part that he would want you to play, and you'd have to kind of decipher what he's talking about, and usually it was the same kind of funk chords, like 9 chords, maybe a 13. One time he said, play this to me, and he meant 13, just put that pinky down on that 9 chord. So, but one of the great arrangements we had was the lead in to Make It Funky. Spike George Neely, our percussionist, came up with this great arrangement of like an intro song, and it had like parts of different songs in it. And it was a thing that Danny Ray, the MC, could like say things into. It was a whole brand new intro, and it had cool little riffs, da 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 dee, da 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 bum, bum bum bum. Very James Brown-esque, but very original and new. And so Spike basically came up with that whole thing. We put it together at a rehearsal, and that stayed the intro to bring James Brown on stage for Make It Funky for years and years after that. So that was a great one that came straight from a band member. So let's see, how was he off stage? Well, sometimes we would try to avoid him because he could come around and like poke holes in what's going on. Like, why are you dressed like that? Or what's going on? Why is it messy in this bus and things like that? So sometimes you try to avoid him, but sometimes he could be real funny and real fun to hang out with. And if you tried to like get him to tell a story about something that you heard about that was fun from the past, sometimes he would take you through that cool story of the old days. And so there was a lot of fun hanging out with him. He could be a bit daunting though, because you didn't know if he was gonna start telling you how you need to do different things on stage, or you need to play different or whatever. But sometimes like going back to the no roadies thing. So sometimes James Brown would say to his road manager, Ronnie Tompkins, who was basically a guy who did like all the jobs. He would say like, make sure the guitar players are on volume 2.5, volume 1.9, volume 1.5, right? Stuff like that. So Ronnie Tompkins would have to go and look at our amps and see that they said those numbers. Well, you go to try to play a solo for 10, 15, 20,000 people, and you're on volume 2. I don't care if you got a distortion pedal and even saved some room on your volume knob. You're going to go out there and it's going to sound like dink, 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 not like wow, So we took to taking the knobs off the amps whenever possible, repositioning them to where we were like on 4 and 5, so we at least had some volume. So sometimes we would have to go around the road manager and around what James Brown wanted, just so the road manager could say to James Brown, I checked it and it's like you wanted. Meanwhile, we're like, we got to also play the show and not get berated in front of the audience because we're so low volume, So we had to take matters into our own hands at times. So going back to how I met James Brown, I was in a band. It had broke up. But the next thing I know, I get a call from the manager and drummer of the band, a guy named Mike Tuttle. And he said, do you know James Brown? He's pretty big, right? I'm like, yeah, James Brown is huge. Like, I don't have like all his records and stuff, but I know a few of his tunes and everything. And I had actually just been to a club where my buddy like was throwing a James Brown dance party where he just kept playing James Brown songs back to back in this nightclub we were at. And it was like a huge dance party going on. And so I heard a ton of James Brown music just like a month or two before I ended up realizing I could meet him. So the first time that I got to meet him was at the Roosevelt Hotel in LA on February 12th, 1998. So it was a pre-Grammy party, and we got invited to play 4 songs. Our singer was doing Janis Joplin. That's Tommy Ray. She ended up becoming James Brown's wife later, a couple years later. So we played 4 songs, and I told the band, just in case we need to learn I Feel Good by James Brown, in case he wants to sit in. Well, guess what? He wanted to sit in, and he wanted to play I Feel Good. So we got to not only meet James Brown, but we got to play a song with him. And then we were in his opening band. So then we got to tour a bit. We got to go to Europe the next summer, got to do a guitar duel against my buddy Keith. I had made friends with everybody in the band and everything by then. So then by the end of that summer, somebody couldn't make it to a gig in Europe. And I got the call. I already had the passport. I had been studying his music for a year and a half. So I ended up getting in the band, and they thought I was done after that like 10-day tour. They sent me home. Next thing you know, next morning I get a call back. There's a gig in Virginia and you got to be there tomorrow. And after that was Woodstock 99. And nobody knew that was coming. We were the last band announced, I think. So we didn't find out until maybe 5 days before. And Keith told me, stay in town, don't go home, because there's something coming up. And if you're on the bus, you're in the show. It turned out to be Woodstock. So thanks again for that advice there, Keith. And then I was in the band until early 2006. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed that. If you have some more to ask me, I'd be glad to answer them. It was a great ride with James Brown. All the people in the band were fantastic. I learned a lot about a lot of different styles of music. We had a lot of fun times. So I'll just keep it at that for now. Thanks a lot for watching, y'all, and we'll talk to you soon.